All right, I think we are good to go. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our spiritual wellness panel hosted by Hillel at Miami University in partnership with the Oxford Interfaith Center and the faith communities of Oxford and Cincinnati. My name is Ben Phlox. I am the Director of Jewish Student Life for Hillel. This panel is part of our bigger Wellness with Hillel series that has been going on all semester. Miami University decided that instead of a spring break, they were going to give students days off of classes called wellness days. And we quickly realized that just because you call something a wellness day does not mean that students are going to engage in healthy wellness practices. And part of that might be just because they don't know how. So we decided to take important aspects of wellness, mental, physical, in this case, spiritual, and create programs that help students not only engage in those practices, but understand why they're important. And that's why we're here. Our panelists will be having a 40 to 50 minute guided discussion. And then we'll spend the last 10 to 20 minutes answering and discussing your questions. So feel free to throw those in the chat at any time, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. Before we begin, just a couple of disclaimers. First and foremost, we are going to be talking about faith, belief, spirituality. And as you can see, there's a lot of different language that's used to refer to those things. We understand that not every term is going to apply to every person or their beliefs, but language is weird, and there isn't always a single perfect word to describe things, especially when we have people identifying new ways to define their experiences pretty much every day. So we ask that you work with us in good faith, pun intended, as we go through this discussion. Number two, along those same lines, we understand that there may be some differing opinions among the panelists and the audience, and some may not agree with everything that is said. So this is just your gentle reminder that we aren't here to question the validity of anyone's beliefs. We're just here to explore spiritual wellness and exist in curiosity so that we can learn from one another and our experiences. So with those disclaimers in mind, I'm going to go through them just one more time for those people on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. This is the Spiritual Wellness Panel. It's part of our larger wellness series. We've been talking about physical wellness, mental wellness, and now spiritual wellness to help students understand what wellness is and why it's important. Couple of disclaimers, we're going to be talking about faith, belief, and spirituality, and because language is weird, there isn't a single perfect word. So we are hoping that you will show us a little bit of grace today and understand that not all words are going to apply to all people, but we're going to try to be as inclusive as we can. Second disclaimer, we understand that there are differing opinions and differing belief systems on this panel and in the audience, and some may not agree with everything that is said. So this is just a gentle reminder that we aren't here to question the validity of belief. We are just here to explore spiritual wellness and existing curiosity so that we can learn from one another and our experiences. Awesome. Now that we have everything in place, and without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful moderator for the evening, Geneva Blackmer. Geneva is the current program director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. She holds a BA in religion and an MA in religious studies from Athens State University. She serves as a global council trustee for the United Religions Initiative, an at-large director for the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, and an administrative director for the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada. As an intern and historian for CRES, she helped found the Kansas City Interfaith History Project in conjunction with her published thesis. She has previously worked with the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington on emergency services, resource outreach, and the Parliament of the World's Religions on their Climate Commitments Project. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, Geneva Blackmer.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks to everyone for being here. The Interfaith Center is really excited to sponsor this event. If you don't know about us, our mission is to invite people from diverse religious, spiritual, and secular traditions and worldviews to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and build relationships, as well as to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So I'm happy to turn it over to our panelists now. They're actually going to introduce themselves. So we're going to do this like Brady Bunch style. I'll just, you can kind of jump in, just tell us who you are, your preferred pronouns. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers, and why you were excited to be on this panel and how it connects with your religious, spiritual, or secular worldview. So who wants to go first? Mark? Maybe I'll call you out.
So, Hey everybody, my name is Mark Von Bullock. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I serve as the Associate Pastor for Family and Campus Ministries at Oxford Presbyterian Church here in Oxford. And I'm very excited to be on the panel and to hear from all of our wonderful panelists about the topic of wellness, which is a very relevant topic during a pandemic. It's something I think we're all sort of learning and relearning how to discover. So I'm delighted to get to hear from our wonderful panelists and happy to be here.
I'll go next. Hi everybody, my name is Nina Imlemdi. I'm currently a junior at Miami University. On campus, I'm involved in Miami Activities and Programming and the Charter Day Ball and Middle Eastern Student Association and Muslim Student Association. Like Ben had said, we have 5 wellness days and it's hard to find time to really take care of yourself and your well-being. So I'm really excited to gain some insights from everyone. And yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
I'll pop in. Hi everyone, my name is Amataj Kar. Like Nina, I'm also a student here at Miami University. I'm a sophomore, and I'm involved as one of the student trustees on Miami's Board of Trustees. I'm a part of Women of Color and Excellence, and I'm a writer for the Odyssey Online. I'm really excited to be on this call today because I belong to the Sikh faith, and often you don't hear a lot about it. And I think being a college student, spiritual wellness is such a gray area for so many students, and being able to learn about other cultures and being inspired to take care of yourself better and just learn and diversify your knowledge is really important. So I'm excited not only to teach, but also to learn today.
I'll go ahead and go. My name is Prince Edward Johnson II. I'm a native here from Cincinnati, Ohio, originally from Evanston, the educating community. I am a second-year PhD student in the LCC program, where I focus on leadership and education curriculum. I'm really interested in exploring contemplative indigenous African practices as a means to promote more healing for those who experience anti-Black racism or any kind of anti-racism work. I'm a community organizer with the Black Alliance for Peace here in Cincinnati, and as well as a community storyteller where I work with poor Black youth in poor Black working neighborhoods all across the Cincinnati area through an organization called Village. And I'm actually, on the board for the Interfaith Center, and as well as the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, where we try to recenter Cincinnati's community development around its rich abolitionist history. So I'm really happy to be here, not only just to learn, but also to shed some light on the ways in which misconceptions of African spirituality can also join in the larger, broader conversations around spiritual wellness and health. So I'm really thankful to be here, and yeah, let's get it in. So it's great.
My name is Earwalton. I am 20-something days away from being a rabbi. My interest in being here is part of my commitment. Yeah, Mark, you know what that's like. So like, I'm very excited to be ordained, but like my interest here is my commitment to being part of this new movement called the Radical Middle, where we listen to people and have conversations. It's not a formal organization, but I really think there needs to be more space where people can have hard and difficult conversations and a place to grow and learn. So that's something I'm deeply committed to, and I've been really part of interfaith work a lot of my personal and professional career, and I'm just happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, we're so happy to have all of you here participating in this conversation with us. We're going to just open it up with a general question. What is spiritual wellness to you? And again, it's going to be kind of informal, so anyone who wants to jump in, just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I can go ahead and start because I'm really interested to hear what everyone else says, but I know for me, and Muslims around the world, Ramadan starts tomorrow, and those 30 days of fasting, which is refraining from food and water from dusk till dawn, is something that it's a form of well-being, but it's also a form of like refreshing and resetting. So when I saw this question about what's spiritual well-being, I think for me, my definition is really remembering God in every action that I take, and knowing and trusting that the bigger picture is what he knows, and I stress about little things, and that messes up with my everyday actions, but truly being well and finding that wellness and that care that God is watching me and cares for me. I think that's where I find mine, but again, I'm really interested to hear what other people say.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'll jump in. I think particularly as a student, there are so many days like after class or like when assignments load up and I just go home and like there's such a burden on my shoulders. Even more than just assignments, like the state of the world right now. Every day looking at the news gets harder and harder. And I'm a political science student, so I feel like of all people, I shouldn't be saying that, but you go home and you feel this like uncharted burden and you're like, when is it going to get better? Just hurting and bleeding for the world. And like, I think personally for me and my faith, where spiritual wellness comes in is like really sitting down and like, like Nina said, like knowing that there is a will and that there's divinity in everyone. And oftentimes I think we as human beings don't realize there's divinity within us. And really acknowledging sometimes we have to be kinder to ourselves than we give ourselves credit for. And I think that's kind of my biggest work in progress spiritually right now, is remembering that God also created me. And when I am looking at these things and I am hurting, it's a good thing, in that I can use my nights to pray for the world and to ask God how I can serve this world, instead of shutting down, desensitizing myself, and maybe, turning off the TV. Instead, praying to God and saying, how can I fix this problem you are allowing me to see? And remembering that there's a reason for everything to go on. I think just that awareness of divinity is a really important aspect of spiritual wellness, and like knowing that it's not all bad and that we have the ability to do things because we too are divine.
I've been thinking about this question a bit this week, and it's a really good question, and it is kind of a tricky one to answer, because spiritual wellness means so many different things to so many different people. And when I think about the spiritual wellness that I try to seek in my own life, I try to find a sense of, I guess, for one thing, a sense of spiritual and emotional health, which I think is really difficult for a lot of people, especially during a pandemic when we're all very isolated. And like the two of you have said already, there's so many burdens on us emotionally, whether it's from school or what's going on in the world. And I think it's really, really hard to hold on to that. But I think, like, for me, finding a sense of joy and gratitude is part of it, and also a sense of purpose. Being able to find some sense of, like, my life has a call or a mission or a vocation in my community, in my neighborhood, that is directly connected to my spiritual life. And that's something that I'm engaged with and that I'm participating in. And I can also find joy and gratitude in that vocation. If I can find those two things, that's when I tend to feel the most spiritually well. But it's difficult. This is a difficult time to be to feel that kind of centeredness. We live in very uncentered times.
Anyone else want to hop in on that question?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. Yes, and for me, just like Pastor Mark was talking about, I've been really rethinking, this particular question a lot, and sometimes these answers change from day to day. The more that I engage in this particular faith practice, but I think for me, in terms of how I use contemplative Indigenous African practices to inform my spiritual wellness. And it means like a lot of different things, but one of the things that it shows up strongly for me is the idea of like it is a holistic practice in a sense that the more that I explore various African spiritual systems, there is a symbiotic relationship between the individual and as well as with the collective. That is to say that as one participates in the nurturing of one's own inner world or my own inner self or my own psyche, it has an affect upon how I show up as well within the world. So in Bantu Congo spiritual systems, they have a word for humanity called Ubuntu, which literally means I am because we are. And in various different cultures kind of express the way which one is rooted within the individual as well as within the society and the need to preserve those things. And so that's what at least spiritual wellness means for me. It informs the way in which I make meaning of my own experiences as a human being. And always reflecting on what are the things that are informing the ways that I show up authentically, and how can I better show up authentically in my own self and in relationship to other sentient beings around me. And that's going really well for me. And, and a lot of times it is extremely difficult, especially when, there's demands, right, that I have in my PhD program and and the work that I'm doing out here. But in a way, this preservation of myself and the others is my own bliss. And so I just continue to follow that bliss and allow, it to guide me forward in the work that I do and things like that. So, yeah, so spiritual wellness means for me.
So Amitash said something really, really meaningful that really resonated for me deeply, was the idea of divine inside of other people and the divine inside of yourself. There was a famous rabbi who used to bow before everyone who walked in the street because he was recognizing the spark of the divine inside of everyone. The core of Judaism, one of the there's a lot of like major tenets, but is that we were all made in some sort of image of the divine. So I think spiritual wellness is a recognition of the divine inside of another person, the other, but also recognizing the divine inside yourself. So spiritual unwellness in a lot of ways would be the alienation of yourself from your own divine source and other people.
Thank you all so much for providing that context for our audience. I'm curious, what are some of your spiritual activities or practices that your religious or spiritual ideology encourages in relation to spiritual wellness? And again, anyone can jump in.
It's a hard one. I can see all of us thinking real hard. I think I don't even know if I'll answer this correctly, to be honest, but I think simply theory-wise, Sikhism really stresses work-life balance. It's not called work-life balance, but it's kind of this concept of being a saint and a soldier, both at the same time. So it's, being that activist, being a soldier, very long ago in India, it meant literally being a soldier, but now it's changed. And being a saint, being spiritual. And I think when you look at that in a broader concept, it's work-life balance. It's okay, make sure you are doing what you can for your community, make sure you are doing selfless service, but also make sure you're taking time to reflect and be centered. I think simply on a student perspective, burnout is so real, especially with no spring break this year. I know I'm feeling it. I'm sure Nina, I'm sure Prince, you're feeling it with your PhD program. Burnout is very real, especially when you belong to marginalized communities that you are constantly fighting for. And I think spiritual wellness, especially in the context of my own religion, is just taking time to reflect and meditate and center yourself with you and your God. And being able to say, like, the good fight's always going to be there, but I cannot do that until I myself am filled up my tank spiritually and I am centered and I am ready to go. So I would love to hear from the other panelists about kind of where they're leaning with this one.
I would love to add to that. I think the same with Amitaj. It's really about, for me, I think it's about finding that time within my own life and my own schedule to really think about why I'm doing something and how it relates to, you know, my values and my beliefs. And I, as a Muslim, one of the set practices is praying 5 times a day. And I think when I went to Miami, there's not a set mosque. I think there was a room with prayer and not many girls go. So finding that self-responsibility to hold myself accountable, to remember God in those actions and remember myself and why I'm doing this. And I think those little things really, I wish I did them more, and I wish I could, you know, hold myself accountable more. And I think doing talks like this and reminding myself that being well and reminding myself that God is with me is something that's important to your overall sanity at the end of the day. And with Ramadan this month, I think it's a good reset for a lot of us, but I remember going through a quarantine, and Ramadan is not the same, you know, being so disconnected from a world that's so interconnected. It's difficult to find that well-being when you aren't with friends who also practice those values, or you aren't in the community that it is involved in. So I think really holding yourself accountable and, you know, being mature about it, recognizing that God should be in every action. And yeah, I agree though.
Nina, you talked about being so disconnected in an interconnected world, and that was I was thinking about what Yair and Amitaj were talking about earlier, recognizing the divine spark in each other, and in the book of Genesis, being created in the image of the divine. The book of Genesis also says that human beings are not created to be alone. We are inherently relational creatures, and it's really difficult to be a relational creature right now because we're all sort of forced to be physically separated in so many ways. But I think that sense of community and that sense of connectedness is a big part of many of our spiritual practices. In the Presbyterian Church, that sense of community can look like praying together, singing together, reading scripture together, doing service for the community together. Can look like many different things, and many different spiritual communities have similar practices. But I think that sense that we are meant to be a communal creature is a big part of our spiritual rituals as different communities of faith, and that's really difficult right now. I think we're longing for that, and it's very, very hard to maintain that.
Mark, you took my biblical quote. I was about to say, so like, I think for me, my most powerful spiritual practice happens every week. Judaism has this concept called Shabbat. So every Friday night, sundown to Saturday, night. I know, and we're talking before times, when you could still see people, but I knew that every Friday I was going to get together with a bunch of friends. We're going to make a big meal, and we're just going to turn off our computer, or turn off our technology, and we're going to commit to being in a place and just existing. The word Shabbat comes from the Hebrew word means to rest, to just lay it all down and be present in the moment, and make that a structure. Because if we don't make it a structure, you're going to make something, oh no, I'll do it later. But you have to, for me, my spiritual practice that's most beneficial for this and before that was actually the action of Shabbat, of saying, no, I'm going to make dinner even though there's nobody coming over. I'm going to sit with my wife and we're going to have Shabbat. And for like at least dinner time, hopefully more, we're not going to look at our phones. We're not going to talk about the state of the world. We're just going to exist. So I think we need more time in this world for ourselves to just exist. And like there's an epidemic. I work on a loneliness project professionally, and there's an epidemic of really just intense loneliness that existed before this. And I think we need more time to improve ourselves and have those moments of connections of real people. I used to say, like, I have 5,000 Facebook friends, but I had no one to go to dinner with on a Tuesday. So, you know, anyone wants to come for Shabbat in my home, not on a Tuesday, on Friday night, please come. Yeah, I'm a pretty decent cook, so.
I'll have to take you up on your offer then.
No, seriously, email me. Well, you come over, great.
I actually spent a large part of my childhood with a good uncle of mine. I call him, he is a Polish Jewish guy. And sadly, he passed away 2 years ago, but Shabbat was something that was one of my most formative parts of my childhood. But in echoing, though, in the spirit of Shabbat, you know, there are the Shabbat traditions, even within the various African spiritual systems. There's a beautiful mythology that reminds me of how to take a day of rest that comes from the Ashanti culture in Ghana. Kind of similar to a biblical story of Job. There was a character who kept experiencing tragedy after tragedy. And, you know, he was really upset that he's always experiencing these tragedies despite his best efforts. So he decided to greet the mother earth goddess named Yaasasi. And when he was able to confront her and let him know exactly how he felt about things, she restored him. And then he started living a beautiful life. And so the way that mythology was told to me when I spent a significant amount of time in Ghana was that it is always important to grieve or to name certain emotions that you experience throughout the day. And it's so easily, just like our sister was saying here, we can easily desensitize ourselves from our own emotions that we actually feel. And our Shabbat would be on a Thursday, which is where we just rest and just enjoy the fruits of our labor, which is really hard for me to do, right? Because, you know, Christian modernity in the United States and the workload makes it really hard to do those things. But nonetheless, I try to set my intention during the rising sun of that day. And anything that maybe I may suppress, I try to bring that out a little bit more and try to have an inner dialogue around those things. And then in the evening time, I just release it. That is something that these forms of spiritual practices actually existed in enslaved plantation societies. It's a really interesting book. And that talks about this a whole lot that I've been researching for my own PhD program, and also just archiving, you know, collecting stories where my family is from in Beaufort, South Carolina, the islands, sea islands down there, the Gullah Geechee culture. It seems to be that the sun seems to be a spiritual totem for our people. And I think it's just really important. It kind of rehumanizes the self in a way, and also it allows me to take just good care of myself. You know, being able to name a particular emotion and to have that inner dialogue with it, almost as if it's a prayer, and then just to release it. And I think it's just speaks to the ways in which there's this African proverb that says, "You must hold up what holds you up." And just using that as a spirit of affirmation throughout the day on a Thursday is really important for me. So yeah, this is what I do.
I really appreciate that you guys named that it is a spiritual practice, which kind of suggests that we have to kind of work at it or really make a point to do it, because it is so easy for the practice of Shabbat, of self-care, to sort of go by the wayside, because there's a million things in our lives that say, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. Yeah, I'll get around to that maybe. But that's how I think we start to wear down. Like in the book of Exodus, At the very beginning of the book of Exodus, when the Israelites are enslaved under Pharaoh, there's a line there where it basically said Pharaoh had the Israelites making bricks for pyramids, and just day in, day out, they're just making bricks, and they're basically are indoctrinated that their purpose in life, their well-being, comes from their ability to produce bricks for the glory of Pharaoh, which is sort of odd. They're basically indoctrinated to say your ability to get stuff done is what gives you value, and that's when God intervenes and says, "Wait a minute, hold on, no, that's not right." But I think we still live in a society today that there's so many different voices in our lives that say your value comes from maybe not how many bricks you can make, but what kind of grades are you getting? How many times have you gotten published? Are you getting that scholarship yet? There's a million things that tell us if you just do more. And I think the spiritual disciplines hopefully are what's running interference and saying, no, your value comes from being made in the image of God, not from being able to produce stuff. But that's a very sort of counter narrative to what we're often taught, I think.
I think what Pastor Mike just said reminded me of something my mom used to always say, like, when something bad happens, you always ask why God, or when something good happens, you're like, thank you, God. But what about the in-between moments? So I think that for me is something that really like woke me up. Like, I'm always at the dead end of every situation. I'm like, thank you, God, or why God? But in between, on my workup, on the build up to it, why don't I remember God? So I think that mindset really shifted for me, especially growing older and recognizing that, like, really finding that well-being and the remembering of God will put in place other aspects of my life.
Are there any specific spiritual wellness practices, maybe like contemplative or meditative or prayer, something like that, that either comes from, that you participate in, that either comes from your own faith or maybe draws upon another faith? And Prince, I think maybe you could speak to that one, so you do a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you're asking like specific practices that maybe that one can do, right? Well, for me, it kind of intersects with a lot of some of the spiritual systems that I really interrogate and try to research, and how that's also intersected with certain yogic beliefs. So I am also a yogi. I practice yoga specifically from a yogi named Sri Aurobindo. And I find his work really extremely fascinating because it kind of speaks, to the same language as the spiritual systems that I'm a part of. And really, it's just the idea of using and stating an affirmation throughout the day. So for me, as someone who is a survivor of anti-Black violence, and there's a lot of trauma associated with those things, I do a lot of these mindfulness techniques to help me to process those things whenever these specific fears kind of show up. So one of the things that I would say is, like, even though I have this feeling, I would also say I still honor and love and accept myself, right? That's something that Sri Aurobindo really tries to emphasize, the idea of holding space for both polarities, which is very, very similar to African concepts. In African worldview, they say that a human being is always like on a threshold, like there's always like an individual world taking place that they just don't necessarily see. And those hidden worlds could be related to our unconscious, like the things that we may hide or the things that we might suppress, but they're always working, at the same time. So the prayer that I offer to my own inner self, especially when I'm encountered with overwhelming feelings, is to be able to not pray it away, but to welcome it in. And within that is how you conjure new realities. And that seems to be a spiritual practice that's pretty consistent with enslaved Africans along the plantation societies. I was reading this amazing story archived down in Charleston, South Carolina, about how a slave master was complaining. He's like, man, my slaves, at the nighttime, they're singing, they're worshiping together in their own African way, and it's always keeping me awake. And he says that, their nighttime was their day, right? And so being able to hold spaces for even our most difficult feelings, and also what we intend to become, is how we kind of create those bonds, at least to me, how I kind of understand it, which represents the same things that, that enslaved Africans were doing. And we see that taking place, the legacies of those things, I kind of argue we see those things in the Black church, right? The idea where the church becomes the center place for being and belonging. But, these are habits that kind of come out of just holding spaces between two different feelings on two different worlds, because an African worldview is that a human being is always at a place of being and becoming, always. There's never like a destination. You're always evolving, but then the more you participate and the more you accept, radically accept what's going on and what you're feeling, there becomes a breakthrough. And I think that's one of those practices that has sustained African American people for such a long time here.
Thank you, Prince. Does anyone else want to comment on any practices you directly engaged in, either from your own tradition or maybe draw from another spiritual religious tradition?
I think, real quick, but when people hear about different religions, they're so quick to, analyze the differences without recognizing all the similarities. I know in Islam's case, I believe the three monotheistic are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, yet all three are, in some cases discriminated against in different countries and stuff. But I know in Islam, a lot of our commandments are modeled from the religions before us, which the Bible and the Torah, and those were all before us, and we used their testaments. And I know, my parents were big on teaching us about Jesus and Jesus's words of love thy neighbor as a huge aspect of Islam, and being a good Muslim is being a kind Muslim and being a kind person. And those aspects are found in different religions too. I'd be really interested, Pastor Mark, if you have any insights on that. But I know that I always find similarities between Islam and Christianity, especially when I went to church with my friends and their message that they were preaching.
Yeah, I was just thinking a moment ago about a practice. So I'm an associate pastor here at Oxford Presbyterian Church, and Lawrence Bartell is the head pastor, which means that he and I sort of partner together on a lot of things. And he and I have two what we call different Sabbath days, which is basically just our way of saying our days off. And so today, on Monday, is Lawrence's Sabbath day. So he's not in the office. I am, as you can see. And then Friday is my Sabbath day. I'm not in the office, and then he is. And one of the things that we try to do, this kind of goes back to what Yair was talking about earlier about Shabbat, is we not only try to take that time for ourselves, we also try to protect that time for the other person. So when Lawrence is taking his Sabbath time, I try to work really, really hard to make sure that he's not going to be disturbed, that anything, if something comes up, I'm going to try to do what I can do to manage it and triage it with our staff so that his spiritual well-being is protected. And then the vice versa is also true. And that just comes from honoring the commandment of the Sabbath, which comes out of the Hebrew Bible. And I think that that one of the ways that we can recognize the divine in each other is to recognize that, not only do I need to be spiritually well, but my neighbor does as well. And it's important for me to be just as mindful, like, how are my friends doing? How is my neighbor doing? Am I noticing that somebody that I know or care about is getting worn out? Is there some way that I can try to help support them as well as support my own spiritual wellness? And I think that's an important part of being a beloved community together, because we're all human. We all, none of us are our resources of time and energy are finite. And so I think that's just part of how we can be a community together.
I think kind of to jump in, for me and my faith, Sunday isn't necessarily a holy day, but here in the States, it's just when everyone is off work. So it worked really well. But I think since I was probably an infant, Sundays at the Gurdwara, the Sikh place of worship, were always just there. And my father's also a Sikh priest, so I don't think I had much say when I was little. But I could, as a almost 21-year-old, I could probably count on my hands how many times I've missed Sunday, just because it's such a large part of, I think, who I am in that reset within the week. And so if you ever come to a Sikh place of worship on a Sunday, typically it'll be 3 passages, maybe 2, that the priest goes through and the entire congregation sings them together. And on these screens in the back, there are English translations, which are really helpful. And at the end, we communally pray together, and then we open up our spiritual guide or spiritual text, and we read a passage. And that passage is kind of considered like God's order or God's response to everyone's prayers. And kind of my own spin on it, it's supposed to be throughout this week, like, how am I going to embody what this passage is saying? Or like, how am I really going to live by what my God is telling me in this passage throughout the week? One, it helped me pay a lot more attention when it would be kind of translated, when, my father, he translates it in Punjabi because a majority of our congregation are immigrants. And so a lot of them speak our native language, Punjabi. And very few of us are completely English speakers. I'm a first-gen American myself. And so being able to just sit down and be like, I really need to focus here so I can understand what is being said, but also holding myself accountable, saying, I'm not going to hear this. I gotta pay attention. I gotta figure out how I can apply this throughout my week. And I had, I guess, home-based advantage, because if I didn't get it, I'd go home and be like, Dad, that made no sense. I need you to go over this like maybe 5 more times with me. But holding myself to saying, okay, I'm going to pay attention on Sunday and make sure that I'm able to apply this throughout the week has been a really large spiritual practice. And I think a bit of a motivator to go, and leave my phone at home for a whole Sunday and say, all right, I'm going to be here in this moment. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to try to understand this, even though this language isn't my main language, but I know it's important because it's such a huge part of my spirituality.
I can go. It's just the awkwardness of Zoom. One thing that I've been, sorry, my dog wants to go outside. So she's very loud. She's really cool. I'll send you pictures later. And so like one thing that since Judaism's idea and main story is a community's interaction with God, right? There's definitely a role of the individual, but since the pandemic has hit, the communal aspect has kind of been diminished. So for me, my own personal spiritual practice has really been focusing on this idea of what is kashrut. So kashrut is like the way that Jews are supposed to eat food, like the way that you don't mix milk and meat, how the meat is handled, it's to bring intentionality into your food. So you're just not just scarfing it down your face. So like I've been reinterpreting that and really thinking about like, where does my food come from? Is it ethical and how I'm eating it? Are the people that are working it being treated fair? How are my personal values being lived out in my purchasing? And how are my personal values being expressed in what I eat? Not only, was that food ethical and like, eating less meat because I have my own ethical issues with that, but like also just like respecting my own body, like realizing that I need to be in good health, that the hamburger and the cucumber might be ethically equal, but what is better for me? What is a better spiritual choice that's going to allow me to feel better? And it's definitely not the double burger. So.
Does anyone else want to add to that question or respond to any of the other panelists? No? Okay. So how can we assess and improve our own spiritual wellness regardless of our individual faith and practice? Any advice for the audience on that?
I can start. I think, well, this is a heavy question, a full question, but I think regardless of whatever faith or religion you practice, I think people having faith in themselves is a really big key in spiritual wellness, and being connected to others, having that relationship, that guidance with friends, and just having healthy connections is so vital. Conversations, I think, especially with the world, like Amitaj just mentioned at the start, the world is so heavy right now, and differences, it seems like, are being put in a spotlight. But, you know, finding those people that you can confide in and you can grow with, regardless of the differences between you guys, is so vital. And I always remember, you know, it's everyone's first shot at life. You know, whatever, whoever you meet, they've never done it before, and everyone goes through different things. So for me, I think recognizing that I see the world in a different way than the next person. You know, I hold values certain to me, close to me, that are different than the next person. But I think finding that middle ground is where you achieving that wellness is by a community, by conversation, will bring that wellness to yourself. And to end it, but also hearing from everyone and everyone's point of views, I think it's so, these conversations are more important now than ever, you know, learning about how it doesn't matter what you believe in, but being well is a part of life, and you owe it to yourself and to take care of yourself and your mind. But
You know, I love that so much. Like I everything you just said, like I love that. And like kind of just to piggyback off of it, I think when we think in theory of bringing spirituality to others, oftentimes that gets misconstrued as to like forcing your beliefs on another person. And like everyone just gave me like a visual head nod, like we were all on the same page there. And like, you know, like everyone knows someone struggling right now. Even if we weren't in a pandemic, that would be true. And oftentimes bringing divinity into someone's life is just being a good friend, or like being a mentor, being a guide, and just being like, you've got this. Like the universe is on your side. It doesn't even have to be religious. It can be like, hey, I know you're having a really tough morning. I got you a cup of coffee. Or, hey, I know you really just need to talk to someone right now. Let's call after this today and we can just talk through your emotions. So often we feel like, oh, like that's not my place, or like, oh, we believe in different things. They won't. It don't matter. You don't got it. You know, that shouldn't even come into the equation. Like bringing spirituality to other people's lives is just being divine. And everyone has their own interpretation of it, but at the end of the day, it means being a good person, really. And being able to bring divinity into someone's life doesn't mean you got to believe in the same stuff. But it means relaying those qualities that you so firmly believe in into another person's life who you know needs it, and then in return allowing others to do so when you yourself need it. I think is a really important part of spirituality that often just kind of gets mislooked.
Yeah, Amitaj, I think that's a really good point. And I think having those like friends and mentors is really important, because I know that when I can feel myself start to get drained or start to feel a little bit empty or worn down, having like a friend that I really trust, or a mentor that I look up to, or whether it's a spiritual director or a counselor or a faith leader, just someone that I can talk to. Again, that's just part of being connected. That's just part of being the community together. And sometimes you can be that person for somebody else. Like you said, sometimes you find yourself in the position of being that neighbor for another person. And I think also just having those rituals that we've been talking about, that, you know, throughout the day or the week or the month, that can sort of help us to stay centered. I think those can be very helpful practices. But I think so much of it, again, is just being communal people together.
I think one thing that I've learned a lot in my life, and especially about Judaism and a lot of faith traditions, are against living life on autopilot. Because if you're not life will happen to you. Like John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're making other plans, and like, we're really just trying to, if you think about it and you go through your day will happen to you. You'll get up, you'll brush your teeth, hopefully go through your day. But living with intention is what really makes it something spiritual. Are you going to examine your life? Are you going to be like, why did I say that? Why did I do that to that person? Did I treat the cashier like a human being or just a way to pay, like an automated teller? Like how am I treating myself and how am I relating with others? And the second half, I think that's something that's been really powerful with me, is like creating spaces and conversations where it's okay to ask uncomfortable questions. I remember I would go into Catholic church, I would taught a lot at a Catholic school, and they would be dancing around the question. They'd be like, I'd be teaching about Judaism and the Torah, and they would be like kind of asking the question. They didn't want to ask the question. And eventually I said, okay, you guys want to know why we killed Jesus? We didn't kill Jesus, but that was the question in their head. And after we had that, I really want to help build a community where they felt comfortable to ask a question. I want my spiritual practice right now is building spaces where we're coming together to learn, that are mutually respectful, that are coming from a place of, I'm not trying, that I'm, sorry. That I'm honestly, I have these questions inside of me that I'm afraid to ask, but I need to ask them and we need to work them out together. So I think it goes back to just the idea of not living on autopilot, living in curiosity, and building a community that is acceptable to ask hard questions. As long as we're coming together, like, I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I have this question.
Facts. Straight up and down, we have to have brave conversations, and I think, yeah, I'm 100 on board with those things. To answer the question. Yeah, hey, all right.
Come on over.
Coming out here too, yeah.
Cool.
So in the spirit of that though, I think there's a lot of things being said about community, and it seems to be really consistent, with a lot of these spiritual systems that are actually waiting to be unearthed from African people. And I think one of the things that I can define and also answer that question is that, like, communal bonds are actually sacred grounds, right? That those are the starting places for maybe even redefining what it means to be a human being. I kind of study decolonial studies, and there's been a lot of talks around how our conception of what it means to be a human being is inherently based upon a domination, because you have to have your validation from the other. So what would it look like then to reimagine what it means to be a human being as a system of relationship? And it kind of goes back to the Ubuntu consciousness, that there is no you without a me, there's no Nina without a Prince, right? And there's a bond there that at any point in time, we can make it into a sacred ground by which we can cross various thresholds, right? The things that kind of keep us apart. We can begin to understand how these relationships work. Why is it that, kind of going back to Rabbi Walton's idea of how people kind of come in with these questions, begin to understand, like, what are certain systems or histories maybe that reinforces these things, and not only how do we disrupt that, but how do we create a new mythology for our species, right? In that way that that can put us more in alignment with each other. So bonds are essentially sacred grounds, and I think in understanding those bonds also really, it begins within your own self, right? You have to integrate even the most difficult emotions throughout the day. I think there's a quote. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with shadow work or anything like that, but the idea of how to bring into conversations some of the most deeper and darkest parts of ourselves, as to say that whenever fear rises, love will always come to meet that. And, we can be rooted, in those things. And so when we accept ourselves radically more, it becomes very easy. I wouldn't say easy, but it does help to definitely accept others from where they are. Because, in African thought, everyone is a mirror towards the self in a particular way. And, there's this really cool quote that I like. One of my mentors told me, comes from the Congo tradition, that if there's no enemy within, then the enemy outside can do you no harm, right? So what we call the enemy, we always think it's out there, but really it's in all of us, right? So how do we create these sacred bonds and have these radical and also deeply compassionate conversations to build bonds with other sentient beings? So.
I think this is one of the things that spiritual health has in common with physical health, because if you think about your physical health, if you think about your body, that also sometimes requires difficult conversations. I mean, I'm sure we've all known somebody who just doesn't want to go to the doctor ever. Sometimes I am that person. But like if you get sick or you hurt something, you're like, oh, something's definitely not right. And someone says, oh, you should go to the doctor. No, just walk it off. When you should go to the doctor. And sometimes we're scared to do that because we're afraid of what we might find out. But that's how you learn. That's how you come to physical health. And I think spiritual health has this in common. Sometimes we also need to have these hard conversations, to ask these hard questions so that we can get at the bottom of what's going on in our community as well, in our society. And that's how we keep not only our individual selves spiritually healthy, but our communities and our societies healthy as well, is by having those hard questions and being able to let go of the fear of going there.
Thank you all so much. I know we're coming up on the hour. We do have 2 questions in the chat from the audience, and I kind of feel like Prince and Mark touched a little bit on the first one already. I'm going to just paraphrase some of it. The first question is from Zachary, who is asking this question in reference to the comments made about the soldier-saint balance and communalism and finding bliss in the dichotomy of being oneself while supporting one's community. How are we supposed to balance these aspects in a day and time when these aspects are so blended? So the space for both aspects of self and community, if it is so important, how can we have this balance when we society pushing against that? The question is in the chat. I might be paraphrasing this poorly, but
I'll chime in real quick because I know I mentioned the saint soldier balance. I see in Zachary's question, he mentions, or I'm sorry, I'm assuming gender. They mention social media, and I kind of just started implementing this, and like, it is like the silliest thing in the world, but every time I do it, I kind of feel like I'm being radical. But when I'm having bad days, like unproductive days, I post about it. Like on my story, I'll be like, hey y'all, I'm having a really bad day. How are y'all doing? Put it in the question box. And like, I'll get people that are like, I have 7 missed assignments. I am struggling. And I'm like everyone's just kind of ranting in them. And these are just anonymous things that people just put to you because you're putting that energy out there. And so what I'll do, and I'm sure some people find this annoying, but I have learned to really enjoy it, is like, I'm like, okay, like we're all having a bad day. If you want to like kind of come with me throughout my day, let's go through it together. Scroll through if you're not interested, but if you are, like, let's keep going. So like, I'll post, I'll be like, I'm having my first meal of the day at 1 p.m. I know this is really bad, but here it is. What are y'all eating? Did y'all eat today? Just a quick poll. And like, I feel like social media can get so pretentious sometimes. Like, you have to be like the best filter, the best lighting, no blemishes. And like, so seldom are we just real that like, hey, I have 7 missed assignments and it sucks. I have no motivation. How are y'all doing? And this, and you know, not to say this is any radical activism by any means, but I do think it's kind of like my way of saying like a spiritual check-in with my following, and just kind of building community in a time where we don't see each other. So many people on social media you follow because you've met each other once, you know each other, but these aren't going to be people you're going to call when you're having a bad day. But seeing someone that you may idolize, that you may look up to, going, I'm having a really rough week. Let's go through the day together. Let's check in. And oftentimes what I'll do is when people are, kind of responding to my prompts or they're voting on polls, I will message them and I'll be like, knowing you're having a really bad week really helped me. Like, I hope your week gets better. Something as simple as that really gets away, one, at the duality of social media, because that's not what it was meant for. We as society have created that. But also it kind of goes into that aspect of divinity, of how can you bring divinity into the lives of other people whose spirituality you don't know, but you do know they are struggling and they are in need. And this way is my kind of way of an elect-in way to do that on social media, because people who interact with my content on my stories, I know they're interested in hearing from me. I know they're rough going through it because I am putting out that I'm going through it. So I guess that was a really long-winded way to say being authentic. Oftentimes it just starts with ourselves, and then others are motivated to do the same thing. I want to hear from everyone else, but when I saw the social media piece, I was like, I got to talk about this.
I think I agree with Amitaj also. It's so important to be vulnerable these days. I think there's so much beauty in saying and recognizing that I'm not okay and I can seek help. And, even if it's as simple as going on Google and seeing how can I get more organized or what's the answer to this, there are little ways to really, help yourself. And it takes some time to recognize that that's okay and you can do that. And I think truly finding that balance, where you find yourself being comfortable with asking for help is a big major part of self-growth and finding and achieving that well-being that everyone searches for. And like Amitaj says, being that connected with others, there's so beauty in a human connection. It's so raw and intimate just to confide in your friend regardless of your problem, and knowing that they're coming with you to you with advice from their own point of view, a fresh breath of air. And I think that's something that not a lot of people really value, but just a good friend, and that vulnerability is so important.
Yeah, I just want to second what Nina was saying there, the idea of vulnerability, at least for me, in light of all the things I just mentioned about, what informs like my own particular faith practice, as just to really affirm differences, if that makes any sense. Affirming differences very skillfully though, right? Affirming differences with compassionate curiosity is something that I really take with me in my own practice around, anti-racist work or anti-Black racism work, and, and things like that. But also begin to really interrogate though, what in the world created these relationships, right? And beginning to ask the questions, how do we kind of get here? That's if I'm doing like the more of the like anti-racist cultural kind of learning circle stuff. But in terms of just very much day to day, what I like to do with my friends is that I try not to always like listen to my friends when they tell me what's kind of going on, like as if I have to provide the answers for everything. Because again, African spirituality teaches that you're like a seed, right? Like everything is already in you, but it takes the community to kind of nurture and grow it. So I always ask these questions, what does that mean to you? And why is that so bad? And just keep asking those kind of self-reflective questions so that they, can have the space to, get out exactly what they want to get out. And that works extremely well. And it does something for me as well, especially for me as a community storyteller. It's just to see how another human being experiences life, very differently, and just to be able to explore those things. And these are the same questions that I've asked to people who don't like me because of the way that I look, right? But, and I've seen the miraculous things that have happened through compassionate curiosity, because the veils of differences reveal itself to be just searching for being and belonging, which is what exactly African spirituality as a whole seeks to make real and known into the material world. So.
Thank you all. I think I'm going to move into the final closing question because we are over time now. And this is a good question to wrap up from Allison. So as we move forward from this panel, what do you suggest to the audience to help foster spiritual connections, to acknowledge that the divine in me sees and acknowledges the divine in you? And so let's just hear from everyone, and then we can wrap up. So yeah.
So I think I'm going to quote a rabbi from like the 4th century who said, "It's not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you're not able to desist from it either." That the problems of the world are great, and we must participate in the fixing of them, even though we might not see the full fruition. So we need to have these hard conversations, these brave conversations that we're having now, and be okay with messing up in those conversations from a place of wanting to learn. Like going back on Prince, I'm sorry this is off topic, but like my boss is an African-American Jewish lady who I've had conversations with for 3 years. And she finally asked me, like, we came to this place of bold conversations. She asked me, like, why do people hate us so much? Like, her being a Black person. And it never really hit me as just like, oh, that's a great question to ask the Jewish. Like, why isn't anyone just straight up said, white people, why do you hate us so much? And it was a really powerful, but we only got to that point because we built a conversation structure where we could ask these bold questions. So the spiritual practice I think that we really all need to work on, especially right now, is there's so much pain and suffering in the world that's, especially through media and personalized media being shoveled into our faces, that we need to pick one thing or two things that we can handle right now, and we don't give up on it, right? We might not finish it, but we got to plant the seed. You might just dig the hole and plant the seed, but you might not see the tree, but we are not able to desist from it. So
I think also to find the, peak spiritual wellness, you need to work on wellness in the other aspects of your life as well. I know Ben had mentioned they did some panels about physical wellness, mental wellness. I think it all, goes hand in hand, and to make sure that you can achieve that well-being that you're trying to reach spiritually, you need to recognize yourself. Am I in the place mentally? Am I taking care of my body? Am I making smart choices that are going to help me? And I think, I know I can't speak for Amitaj, but in college, it's hard to find those wellness in every aspect. And I can't imagine going into the adult world right now and really taking care of my mental health while being productive in every other means. So I think finding that balance in your life where you can truly, look at yourself and say, I'm doing okay, I'm doing what I can, and I'm working on myself, and that will help you achieve that spiritual wellness. And like Yair had said, it's all about just that human connectedness and that conversation that you can have, and we're all humans at the end of the day, like I said earlier, we're all going through life for the first time, so being kind to one another and looking at someone and not making assumptions right when you meet them or when you find out what they believe in, and having just a pure human interaction just leads to more meaningful relationships and conversations. And I'm excited that this conversation happened, but yeah, that's
I think building off of both of y'all, gosh, I just had it and I just lost it. 1 second. Oh yeah, here we go. So I think a really common American phrase is like, you are who you surround yourself with. And growing up, I always thought that meant like oh, must surround myself with people of my same identity in order to preserve my identity. But as I have grown and matured and really fought that, I realized that's just not true. While it is important to be involved in your own identity, I think it is 4 times more important to surround yourself with people with different identities, now more than ever. And I think a way to build spiritual connections with others is diversifying your friend groups, diversify your professional groups, diversify your mentors. My best friend is a 55 white woman who is a pastor kid of a Salvation Army preacher. Holistically, we have nothing in common. However, where we reach together is we want to better the lives of the people around us. She happens to be in elective office. I happen to be a college student. However, those differences don't matter when we're together because ultimately we want to build a better lives for the people around us. And more often than not, that is the case for most people who are activists, who are working to fight for a better community. And the only way we as individuals, we as followers of whatever practice, is going to be when we learn from others and take those learnings and work together versus staying in our own little corners of the world, trying to find solutions on our own.
Yeah, in the same vein as pretty much everyone else, being willing just to be brave, honestly, and continue to make meaning together as much as possible. I think it's really important to definitely affirm yourself, as your own practice in terms of how you feel. I think that's really, really essential as you're experiencing life, and being able just to hold space for others to do the exact same thing. There is a temptation, I think, for human beings, because globally we've been socialized into differences and difference making, where sometimes it kind of collapses back to what I'm going through is deeper, or what I'm going through is more than yours. I think we have to be really reflexive with that, and that can be very dangerous and very counter to creating a more solidified global community, at least is what I hope to be a part of. But really, it's just being able to hold stories and being able to listen to stories. I think is really essential. Check in with family and friends as much as possible, even when you don't feel like it. I spend a lot of time writing to people who are incarcerated, or try to check in with family as much as I can, and just begin to be as humanely possible throughout the whole day, really, essentially. But I think what's really important is to definitely affirm yourself, celebrate yourself, and learn to fall in love with yourself, and to discern the people that you want to share those things with. To be honest, I think those are really kind of good and important things to do, and not be afraid to do that from the so-called other, because who knows, they might be your best teacher, so to speak. They might be able to give you a good boon or a blessing in your life. So hopefully that all made sense. I don't know.
Yeah, and I just feel very grateful for conversations like this one, and Geneva for the work of the Interfaith Center, and for all of you guys, and for folks that are watching, because you guys are creating space. You guys are creating that space right now for conversations and the hearing of stories. And when I look at all the people that are participating and watching, that tells me that we are in a community that values those spaces and want to create those spaces. And so that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement for neighborhoods like ours. And I'm very grateful for all of your voices.
Well, thank you all so much. Thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your time and your wisdom, and for all of our audience, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook, or if you'll be watching this recording later in the future. We're happy that you joined in on this, and thanks so much to Ben and Hillel for organizing this. I'm gonna turn it back over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I'm really just here to parrot everything that everyone else has said. A big thank you to Geneva for moderating tonight. a giant thank you to our panelists for agreeing to be here and share themselves and discuss these big topics with each other and with you. And also a big thank you to everyone who's stuck it out with us. I know we're very well over our time. But like Pastor Mark said, it's because we have a community that's invested in creating these spaces and allowing these conversations to happen so that we can learn from each other and we can expand and build that community and help ourselves in the process. So a big thank you to everyone involved, both participant and panelist alike. If you are interested in learning more about Hillel in particular, just so everyone knows, Hillel is the Jewish Center on campus. You can go to our website, which is muhillel.org. We also have an Instagram, a Facebook page, and all that other good social media goodness. Thank you, Geneva, for putting it in the chat. Real quick, I'm just going to call on everyone real quick if you want to give a shout out to any groups or pages that you promote. Geneva, I'll let you go first since you are the moderator.
Yeah, if anyone is interested in attending the Interfaith Center's programming, you can go to our website, oxfordinterfaithcenter.org, and sign up for our mailing list. We send out a newsletter with all of our weekly events. You can also visit us on Facebook under the Interfaith Center at Miami University or on Instagram at Oxford Interfaith Center.
Awesome. I'm just going to go in order of the people on my screen. Nina, do you have anyone you want to give a shout out to? Nope. Okay.
Yes, you guys. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It was an awesome conversation.
Our pleasure. Mark.
No, just ditto to what Nina said. This was really wonderful and really meaningful.
Fantastic. Amataj?
No, thank you for the opportunity, though.
All right. Yair?
If anyone wants to come for Shabbat and you're vaccinated, let me know.
And last but not least, Prince.
No, really, nothing more to say. I just really appreciate in creating this sacred space with you all today through, some real compassionate, courageous conversations. And it's just really good to be standing on sacred ground with you all. So we definitely need to have more of these. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, it is our pleasure, and we also hope to have more of these as well. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for sticking it out with us. I know we went well over our time, but obviously it's a conversation that was well enjoyed and well worth having. So that being said, have a great rest of your night, and we hope to see you all on campus, off campus, on Zoom, off Zoom, as soon as we possibly can. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.